Hi, everybody. Welcome to Bookies. I'm Bear. Thanks for clicking on the link. Have you ever had a preconceived notion about an author and then been pleasantly surprised because your preconceived notion was entirely incorrect? That was my experience with Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson. Let me explain to you a little bit about what I mean. Mistborn by Brandon Sanderson is the first Sanderson novel that I've ever read. And I generally prefer fantasy novels to be kind of grim and dark. And in looking around the internet and watching lots of interviews with Sanderson where he talks about his work or a particular novel, I noticed a very kind, practicing Mormon man. And I was thinking to myself, he's probably not going to be able to write the kind of fantasy that I enjoy. Grim, dark. And I have to say, I was pleasantly surprised. And so shame on me for stereotypical thinking. But before we get into just blowing apart my stereotypes with regard to Brandon Sanderson, let me invite you to subscribe to the channel. Bookies is the only channel that I'm aware of that, when fully monetized, will give all the proceeds to local libraries and literacy programs, both my local library and subscriber local libraries. And it may take a while to get there, but I'm working hard at it. And so I think eventually we're going to get there, and it'll be a great thing when I can write that first check. So if you like the content, please subscribe. Mistborn was published about 20 years ago, and so I'm probably one of the 3 readers that hasn't read this novel, but let me tell you what I really loved about it. So first, I really loved the climate and then the social environment. And the climate is, everything is cloaked in gray. There's no color. It's completely devoid of color. And ash falls from the sky all the time, and it cloaks everything in just this dull wash of gray. I love that, and it allows for a lot of interesting things that the author can do with it. The second thing I really enjoyed was the social environment. Essentially, we have a society that's divided between the common people, the Skaa, and the nobility. And the common people are essentially in a form of chattel slavery. They're property. They're there to be used for labor, the sexual enjoyment of the nobility. It's a very oppressive environment. And the nobility, they're very interesting as well, because when you normalize evil, people start to think that the evil that they are doing is okay. And that's essentially what we have with the nobility. The evil of chattel slavery is normalized, and you see nothing wrong with the way society exists. Now, Sanderson's world is ruled by the Lord Ruler. And the Lord Ruler at one time was the hero of ages. He saved the whole world from this darkening threat. He defeated that. But then something went wrong, and he became an oppressive ruler. The interesting thing about the Lord Ruler is he's divine. He is a godling of some sort, and it seems impossible to overthrow a god. But there's one guy that thinks he can do just that, overthrow the Lord Ruler. And his name is Kelsier. Kelsier is highly charismatic. He's just an incredible leader. And you've probably known people like that. When I was a naval officer, I met a few rare examples of just phenomenal leadership. To me, Kelsier is like that. He's the kind of guy you want to follow. And he's so charismatic that he's gathered around a collection of individuals that are somewhat reluctant to join him in this quest to overthrow the Lord Ruler, but due to his charisma and leadership, he convinces them to do so. The thing that you should know about Kelsier is he has almost unlimited magical ability. In Sanderson's world, the magical system works such that there are 8 abilities, and Kelsier has all 8. The people that he gathers around him, with the exception of a character I'll mention soon, only have one. Now, it goes without saying that the quest to overthrow the Lord Ruler is a complete long shot, but Kelsier has a bit of luck. He runs across an individual by the name of Ven, and she is in a gang of thieves. And like Kelsier, she will discover through Kelsier's tutelage that she has all 8 magical abilities. She's raw, she's untrained, so essentially she begins this journey of discovering her own talents. But here's the problem with Ven, aside from inexperience, is she has a complete inability to trust in others. And that's just a function of her growing up on the streets and looking out for number one to make sure she can find her next meal. But Ven's going to have to learn to trust everybody else in the crew, and in particular Kelsier, if she's going to ever attain some kind of purpose in her life, particularly if they're going to take on the Lord Ruler. That's my brief run through the novel without giving you any spoilers. Now, for the 3 of you that have not read this novel, let me tell you why I liked it, and I will hope to convince you to read this novel. First, let me talk about the pacing. The pacing of the novel is great. In my review through social media of Sanderson, I discovered that a lot of people are critical of him because his novels are so long. And by no means is that unusual in fantasy literature, but the critique is essentially there's 100 or 200 pages that Sanderson could have left out. And what that really is, it's a critique about pace, that the pace is too slow and that the novels stall at some point before they pick up again. I didn't have that experience at all with Mistborn. And the reason for that is when the story is compelling, every element of the story is compelling, you want to sit down with the book again and read more and more. And when you want to go back to the novel over and over again because it's so intriguing, you'll find that the pace is quick. So at least with regard to Mistborn, I found the critique that his novels can tend to be a little slow in pace completely invalid here. Now, another thing I really enjoyed was that the novel did actually have some grit in it. So credit to Sanderson for that. And specifically, I want to talk about Kelsier. Kelsier is loved by his crew, and he does seem to have a somewhat of a moral flaw, and that is that he wishes to kill all the nobility without exception. And yeah, you could call that a character flaw, but that's not particularly unusual when you've got class dynamics the way they are. But Kelsier in particular can be vicious, and I really love that about him. I mean, after all, to kill with total disregard of the sanctity of life is pretty gritty. What I really like about Kelsier is he kind of represents all of us in the sense that there's good and bad in everyone. While he can be particularly cruel as it relates to the noble class, he's kind and generous with his friends. Likewise, I think Ven is an excellent and strong character, and that's because she's complex. It's somewhat of a trope in fantasy literature to have somebody that has undiscovered ability that discovers that ability and takes on a grand, almost unthinkable quest. Yeah, that's true, but Sanderson plays that very well. As I already mentioned, Ven is untrusting, and that allows him to actually have her grow in character, and that's exactly what she does. For example, during this novel, she takes on the role of a spy. So you take this street urchin with no etiquette and they train her up so she can go to balls and spy on the nobility. And she does that. But what happens in that spying role of hers is she finds that not all the nobility are, as Kelsier would say, some of them are kind, some of them are good, and they're just unaware of the evil that they're doing because that's just the way they've been raised. And she learns altruism. She starts to see humanity in people that she had stereotyped as being grossly evil, and it allows her to grow as an individual. And it goes without saying that because this is Sanderson and he writes so well and he develops characters so well, that the other characters in the crew are excellent as well. Each of them is expert at one magical ability, but it's not necessarily just the expertise they have in the ability that's intriguing. It's how they form as a group and how they advance their common purpose. And while I think Sanderson develops each of these surrounding characters well, they're well crafted, he allows them to be somewhat one-dimensional, and that's not a bad thing, because when the surrounding cast of characters are a little bit one-dimensional, they have a personality, they stick to that personality type, it allows the reader to really focus on the main character then as she develops and grows. And lastly, I want to talk about the baddies in this novel. So the Lord Ruler himself, I thought, was an excellent character. The Lord Ruler is somewhat distant. You don't learn a lot about him as Lord Ruler. You know that there's an element of divinity. You know that he is essentially the head of the snake as it relates to this kind of class struggle between the commoners and the nobility. And so in that respect, he's a little bit of a trope. However, what Sanderson does in this novel is excellent. Each chapter begins with kind of a journal entry of the Lord Ruler. And this is when he was the hero of ages, when he was conquering the darkness, the threat to all humanity. And you could see in that a real person, somebody that cares for humanity, wants to do good by them, defeat the evil. And at the same time, he doesn't trust himself because he knows the allure of power. And he has kind of this internal dialogue where he's concerned about what he may become if he succeeds, if he becomes the Lord Ruler. And so that dynamic where the reader gets to see the inner person of the hero of ages and then contrast that with what he's become in the Lord Ruler, I thought was very interesting. And next, I think the magical system is really intriguing and I think unique. I've read a lot of fantasy over the years. I mean, look at me, I'm old. This magical system is based on ingesting common elements like iron or copper. And when you have that in your stomach, you can burn it to create greater power and strength and endurance, or acute listening and eyesight and other abilities that I'm not going to spoil for you. But I really love the idea that the magic user has a weakness in the respect that he or she must always have these elements on their body. Otherwise, the magic is worthless when you run out of those elements. And so the magic bestows great power, but it has a great weakness as well. And the other really great thing about the magical system is it says something about the social environment. So to have these magical abilities, it's genetic. So you must have had a parent or grandparent that was noble for you to get any magical ability. In the case of Kelsier and Ven, they had a parent that was nobility. And those skills have to be developed. They aren't just naturally inherent. I mean, yes, you have them, but they're worthless to you unless you train and you understand how they work. And the way that impacts society is that all the nobility have this ability, but for many of them, or I would say even most, because they're kind of foppish and lazy because of their wealth, they don't train it and develop it. So it's useless with regard to them. And I like that dynamic where you have the powerful, the nobles that actually train and they use this ability. And then you have the nobility that are just getting fat off the slave labor of the Skaa. And the last thing I really, really enjoyed about this novel is it's not just a simple fantasy novel where there's a quest or a goal that has to be achieved. Sanderson is saying something about self-sacrifice, slavery, class warfare, the normalization of evil. And so he addresses all of these kind of big picture things, and it gives this novel, it gives Mistborn substance. The bottom line here is that Sanderson is an excellent author. I think it's what you write and not how you write that makes you a great author. And I think a lot of modern day authors forget that. And Sanderson has not. And to that end, I rate Mistborn 4.75 stars out of 5. It's a truly excellent novel. And for those of you that enjoy fantasy literature, this is a must read. You have to read this novel. And for those of you kind of on the outside looking in and you're looking for an entry point for fantasy, Aside from The Hobbit and The Lord of the Rings, I think Mistborn is a great starting point. You can't go wrong with this novel. And for those of you that have not read it, read it. And with that, right about now, there should be a little circle with me and my better looking days as a naval officer. And if you click on that, you can subscribe to the channel. I'd love to have you. Have a great day, and God bless.